Welcome to Game Founder Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at Sheriff of Nottingham. And Sheriff of Nottingham players are merchants trying to get their goods past the sheriff. Let's jump right in with the description and rules, see a few example turns being played, then I'll be back for some closing remarks.
This is Sheriff of Nottingham, set up for a 4-player game. To set up, each player picks a color and takes the placard and bag in that color along with 50 money. The rest of the money just forms a supply. If this is your first time playing, the rulebook recommends leaving out the royal goods, which just look like regular goods, but they actually count as contraband, which you can tell by the red outline. But we are going to keep them in because they have some interesting scoring implications for the end of the game. If you're playing a 3-player game, also make sure you remove all the cards from the deck with the 4+ symbol, which you can see there. But we're a 4-player game, so we don't have to do that. So the deck is shuffled, and each player is dealt a hand of 6 cards, and the top 5 cards of the deck are flipped face up to form a discard pile. Anybody can look through these piles at any time. The next 5 cards of the deck are flipped face up to form another discard pile. So you're always going to have 2 face-up discard piles and a draw stack. Then you just pick a player to be the first sheriff, and the game begins. The game is played in rounds divided into 5 phases, including market, merchant bag, declaration, inspection, and end of round. The sheriff only participates in the inspection and end of round, or the last 2 phases, but after a round the sheriff marker is going to pass left, and the game ends after each player has been sheriff twice, or in a 3-player game after each player has been sheriff 3 times. So the first phase is the market phase, and it starts to the sheriff's left and goes clockwise. Players can set aside up to 5 cards from their hand. To set a card aside, you just put it face down. So let's pretend this player set aside 2 cards. Then he can draw from the discard piles or the draw stack back up to 6. But once you draw from the draw stack, you can never draw from the discard piles again. So he could draw the first card from a discard pile if he wanted to, and the second card from a discard pile if he wanted to, or he could draw one from the discard pile and one from the deck. But remember, the deck has to be the last thing you do. So after you're back up to 6 cards, you discard the cards you set aside face up in one discard pile. You can choose the order, but everybody will be able to look through and see what you discarded. So after every player except the sheriff has their new hand of 6 cards, we move on to the load merchant bag phase. Players simultaneously put 1 to 5 cards from their hand into their bag. You cannot put 0 and you cannot put more than 5, but after you're done, you just seal the bag by clipping it closed and putting it face down in the middle of the table. So after everybody's loaded their bag, you're going to make your declaration to the sheriff. And the way you do that is you declare one type of legal good. You can't tell the sheriff you put contraband in there, even though you may have. So in this case, let's pretend I had put a bread and a silk in there. I'm going to tell the sheriff I've put 2 bread in here. You cannot lie about the quantity of cards you've placed in, but you can certainly lie about the contents. So after everybody's made their declaration, the sheriff gets to inspect the bags. The sheriff can inspect the bags in any order he chooses, and he can even threaten the bag's owner. Players can bribe the sheriff using gold, goods in their merchant stand, which are goods they've already earned, goods in their bag, or just promises. If the sheriff accepts a bribe, he has to let you pass without inspecting your bag, in which case you just open your bag and show everybody the legal goods you have, putting them next to the indicated part of your board, but the contraband goes face down in front of you. Nobody gets to see what the contraband was. However, if the sheriff doesn't accept your bribe, or there was no bribe and the sheriff decides to inspect your bag, you're publicly going to reveal the contents. If you told the complete truth, for example, if I had 2 bread in this bag, the sheriff would have to pay me 2 for each revealed bread, because this is the penalty. So he takes 2 of his own money, pays them to me, and then I get the bread face up in my area. If, however, I was lying, the truthful goods are still added to my market stand, so I was honest about this bread, so it would still go to my stand. However, this wasn't a bread, and I told the sheriff it was, so I have to pay the sheriff equal to the penalty, which in this case would be 4. All goods I lied about, the sheriff confiscates and puts in one face-up discard pile for everybody to see. So after the sheriff chooses what to do with all the bags, either inspect them or let them pass, the sheriff marker passes left. After all players have been sheriff twice or 3 times in a 3-player game, the game is going to be over. A couple things to go over before we go over the end of the game. If you ever run out of gold but you need to pay, you have to pay using the value of your legal goods. If you run out of legal goods, then you have to pay using the value of your contraband. If you're still out of money, any remaining debt is just avoided and you do not have to pay it. Also, if the deck ever runs out, you reshuffle all the cards but the top 5 in each discard pile to form a new deck. So anyway, at the end of the game, players score points based on the value of all the goods they have in their area, both contraband and legal goods, plus the value of the money they have, plus any bonuses they receive. If you have the most or second most of a type of goods, you receive bonus points. You can see here for cheese, if you have the most, you get 15, and second most is 10. And they have these values for all the different types of goods, except contraband. If multiple players are tied for the most, you add up the value of most and second most and divide it evenly among them, but round down. And then you do not give out a second place award. If 2 or more players are tied for second, however, you divide the second place value among those players. If you're using the royal goods, there are some special implications at this time. You'll see that this one counts as 2 bread, and for purposes of determining who has the most and second most, this will actually count as 2 bread. So that's all they really do there at the end of the game, but whoever has the most points wins. Let's get going with this example playthrough. This player is starting as the sheriff, so that means this guy's going to go first in the market phase. He can set aside up to 5 cards and then draw back up to 6. He's just going to set aside 1, so he puts it face down off to the side. Then he can draw from the top of either discard pile or the top of the deck, but remember, remember, if there's multiple cards and he draws from the deck, he has to continue drawing from there. He can never go back to the discard piles. So he's going to take this one card, put it in his hand. Everybody saw he took the chicken, and now everybody's going to see him lay out some bread. And then this player would go and do the same thing. We're going to go once around the table. The sheriff does not get to do this. So we move to this guy, and he thinks those apples look really good because he has a whole bunch of apples in his hand. So he's going to set aside 3 cards, and he's just going to put them face down, and he's going to draw 3. So 1 of which is the apples, 2 of which is the apples, and 3 he's going to draw from the top of the deck. So these cards go out. He has to pick a discard pile. He's going to put them on this one, and then play proceeds to this guy. We're going to come back at the start of the next phase so you can see what that looks like. Now that all players except the sheriff have refreshed their hands, players are going to load their merchant bags at this time. They're going to do that simultaneously. This guy knows the sheriff saw him take a chicken, so he's actually going to fake the sheriff out, or at least he's going to try to, and he's going to put 3 things of contraband in there, but he's hoping to convince him that it's actually chicken. So he takes this and puts it down, and all players are doing this simultaneously. So now that all players have loaded their merchant bag, remember it has to be between 1 and 5 goods. You can't put all 6 in there, but you can't put 0 either. The players now declare in clockwise order, starting with the left of the sheriff, what's in their bag. So this guy declares, and you have to be honest about the quantity, that he's got 3 chickens in here. And this guy declares that he's got 5 things of apples, and this guy has 3 things of cheese. So now we're at the inspection phase, and the sheriff can choose to inspect these bags or not inspect them in any order, and he can certainly threaten people. He says to green guy, is there really 3 chickens in there? And he says, absolutely. And the sheriff says, okay, I'm just going to let you pass. So now this bag is opened, but since it's all contraband, he doesn't have to show anybody, just that there's 3 cards, and puts them face down, and the sheriff gets a little disappointed because he didn't do his job very well. And then the sheriff says to yellow, I really don't think you're lying, because 5 apples in the first turn lying would be very aggressive, so I'm going to let you pass. So yellow opens his bag, and he did in fact have 5 apples. So the sheriff did a good thing there, and he lays those apples out so everybody can see them next to the apples part of his board. And lastly, for purple, the sheriff just doesn't believe him that he has 3 cheeses in there, but he doesn't think he's a total liar, so he says, I won't inspect your bag if you give me 1 of the cheeses in there. He thinks he's got at least 1, but not a whole 3. And purple says, no, I'm telling you the truth, there's 3 cheeses in there. So sheriff says, I'm sorry, I'm going to inspect your bag then. So he opens it up, and there is in fact 3 cheeses, so the sheriff owes him $6 because those are all honest, and then he gets them in his area. And now the sheriff passes to the next player. All players draw back up to 6 cards, and then we continue with the market phase in the next round where players can refresh their hands. Welcome back to the last round of the game, because this player is now sheriff for the 2nd time, and everybody else has already been sheriff for the 2nd time. We're at the declaration phase. This guy declares 4 chickens, this guy declares 4 bread, and this guy declares 5 cheese. The sheriff just watched yellow draw 4 cheese right out of the discard pile, so he says, okay, yellow, you go through. I don't want to bother with you, although there was some contraband in there secretly, so the sheriff's a little bit disappointed. But he says, red, there's absolutely no way you have 4 chickens in there. If you give me 1 chicken, though, I'll let you pass. And red says, yes, I will accept that deal. So this bag opens, and now red gives 1 of his chickens to purple. However, interestingly enough, you have to honor deals except for future promises. You don't have to honor them at all. But if he had no chickens in here, he wouldn't have had to give anything. But anyway, 2 contraband and 1 more chicken. And lastly is green, and purple says, there's no way you have 4 bread in there. If you give me 5 money, I'll let you pass, because I know you have a whole lot of contraband. And green says, no way, I do have 4 bread in here. And purple says, okay, let me open it then. Don't give me the money. And it turns out it really is 4 bread. So now purple owes him 2, 4, 6, 8 money. So he gets his 4 bread, and then he has to pay 8 money to green. Now that the game is over, we calculate the final scores and determine the winner. So now we add up the total amount of money each player has. I put them in neater denomination so you can see this guy has $64. Plus the value of all of your goods. You can see all the bread are worth 3 points each. All of the cheese are worth 3 points each. All of the chickens are worth 4 points each. And all of the apples are 2 points each. So you add up all those in addition to your contraband, which have varying values but tend to be a little bit higher. Then we have to determine the bonuses. And remember, if you're using royal goods, they count as a certain type. Like this counts as 3 apples for determining the most. So let's do apples first. This guy has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Plus this counts as 2, so he has 10 apples. This guy over here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this guy has none. And this guy actually has 6, although he has no apples because both of these count as 3. So he would get 20 points for being first, and this guy would get 10 points for being second in apples. All the other goods would work similarly, except they have different amounts of points, so players total up their score. Whoever has the most points wins.
Sheriff of Nottingham is fun to play. It's basically a social game with a huge bluffing component, but all the parts of it are very easy to understand, and most of the parts of the turn are simultaneous, which keeps everybody engaged all the time, which is great for this type of game. The main part of the game, though, is of course being the sheriff, or trying to convince the sheriff that your goods are legal and they should pass. It's really different being on opposite sides of that, but it can be really fun the same. Some people certainly get get frustrated, and depending how comfortable people in your group are with lying or deceiving people without like giggling or anything like that, the game will play a little bit differently. But the scoring at the end is pretty in depth for this type of game. So if you're trying to play it seriously, you can probably get away with it. But it's definitely best for a lighthearted, fun type of social game. So if this looks fun to you, check it out. That's Sheriff of Nottingham.